Hey y'all, it's entry number 23 of this offseason series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Saquon Barkley, running back, New York Giants. We'll start with the positives with Saquon Barkley's fantasy profile. To start, we have to talk about how he's a dual threat and how much potential volume he could see. During his career, Saquon Barkley has proven that he's just as much of a threat through the air as he is on the ground. Over the course of his career, Barkley has averaged 4.32 receptions on 5.91 targets for 33.7 receiving yards and 0.18 receiving touchdowns per game, according to Pro Football Reference. In addition, Barkley has averaged 15 carries, 66.8 rushing yards, and 0.43 rushing touchdowns per game on the ground. Not many backs have the opportunity to see nearly 20 touches per game with over 100 scrimmage yards like Barkley, which makes Barkley a much more intriguing buy in 2022. Next up, we gotta talk about the offensive line changes. Over the past few years, the New York Giants offensive line has been bad. Last year was no different as the team's offensive line ranked 30th in the NFL at the end of the 2021 season, according to Pro Football Focus. But there's reason for hope in 2022 as the team does a complete overhaul on their line. Outside of left tackle Andrew Thomas, every single starting position on the Giants offensive line is going to be different. This new New York Giants offensive line is currently slated to be the 18th best offensive line in the league, according to Pro Football Focus in 2022. When a line has been as bad as the New York Giants in the last few years, any change is good since there's really nowhere to go but up. Having a different and likely better offensive line should be a good thing for Saquon Barkley and help raise his efficiency and therefore fantasy value. The last major thing I liked about Saquon Barkley's fantasy profile is the talent and pass ceiling that he's shown. Saquon Barkley is a physical freak that ran a 4.4 40-yard dash, had a 4.24 20-yard shuffle, did 29 reps on the bench press, and has a 41-inch vertical jump. In 2018, he was the first running back to go second overall since Reggie Bush in 2006. And he looked like he was going to be the next big thing after his rookie season, where he was the RB2 in standard with 18.4 fantasy points per game, RB2 in .5 PPR formats with 21.3 fantasy points per game, and the RB1 in full PPR formats with 24.1 fantasy points per game according to Fantasy Pros. He has been a little unfortunate with his situation and luck the past few years, but the bottom line is there aren't a lot of players who have showcased the talent and fantasy ceiling of RB1 overall that Barkley has. And the other ones who have are generally going in the first round. Moving on to some of the concerns with Saquon Barkley's fantasy profile. To start, we have to talk about his recent injury struggles. Saquon Barkley has dealt with a variety of injuries over the last 3 seasons, playing in 13 games in 2019, 2 games in 2020, and 13 games in 2021. His injury history at the NFL level thus far includes a hamstring strain in 2018, a high ankle sprain in 2019, an ACL, MCL, and meniscus tear in 2020, and a low ankle sprain in 2021, according to Player Profiler. He's only played in 44 of a possible 65 regular season games at this point of his career, or 67.69%. And based on his track record thus far, there's a very real chance he doesn't play in all 17 games during the 2022 NFL season. Another concern with Saquon Barkley's fantasy profile is his recent yards per carry relative to the Giants' other backs. Over his last 181 carries, Saquon Barkley has totaled just 627 rushing yards, or 3.46 yards per carry according to Pro Football Reference. While the offensive line play and injuries surely impacted this average, as well as yards per carry not being the best metric by itself, it is a little concerning to see this average so low, even compared to some of the Giants' other running backs. Devontae Booker had as many rushing yards as Barkley on 17 fewer carries, with 593 rushing yards, and he averaged 4.1 yards per carry in 2021. And Elijah Penny averaged more yards per carry as well, with 4.1 yards per carry in 2021. The last major concern with Saquon Barkley's fantasy profile is the suspect offense the last couple of seasons. As much as we expect the Giants' offense to be better on paper in 2022, it's important to remember where they are coming from the last few years. During the 2020 NFL season, the New York Giants scored just 25 touchdowns all year and averaged just 299.6 total yards per game, which was 31st in the NFL. In 2021, they were somehow even worse as they scored just 23 offensive touchdowns all year and averaged just 287.3 total yards per game, which was 31st in the NFL. Even with some improvements, there's a solid chance that this offense is below average in 2022, which could limit the number of scoring opportunities for Saquon Barkley. Some additional thoughts on Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley was RB34 in standard with 107.6 total fantasy points, 7.7 fantasy points per game, RB32 in half PPR formats with 128.1 total fantasy points and 9.2 fantasy points per game, and RB30 in full PPR formats with 148.6 total fantasy points and 10.6 fantasy points per game in the 2021 season according to Fantasy Pros. In 0.5 PPR formats, Saquon Barkley had 3 out of 13 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 5 out of 13 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 2 out of 13 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 2 out of 13 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, and 1 out of 13 games with over 20 fantasy points according to fantasy data. The coaching changes. The New York Giants will have a brand new coaching staff in 2022 as they move on from the Joe Judge, Jason Garrett / Freddie Kitchens, and Patrick Graham-led group to bring in Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, and Don Martindale to lead the team. Looking at their new head coach's previous coaching data, on the ground he used to give his running backs a lot of carries, but it has tailed off a lot more in recent years. Through the air, his running backs have pretty consistently seen below average usage thus far, but it is worth noting that he's shown a willingness to adapt his usage based on the talent he's dealt. Like for example, see Daboll's drastic wide receiver usage changes after the team traded for Stephon Diggs. There are reports that the Giants will move Barkley all over the field, so it will be interesting to see how Daboll utilizes Barkley during the season in 2022. Saquon Barkley played in just 2 games in 2020 and was RB 118 in standard, RB 118 in half PPR, and RB 119 in full PPR formats. Saquon Barkley was RB 10 in standard, RB 10 in half PPR, and RB 10 in full PPR in total fantasy points during the 2019 season according to Fantasy Pros. Saquon Barkley had the second most broken tackles in 2018 with 30, tied for the 17th most broken tackles in 2019 with 16, and had the 63rd most broken tackles in 2020 with 4. According to RotoWire, his broken tackle percentage of 9.9% in 2021 was below average for a running back. Saquon Barkley posted a drop rate of 12.3% in 2021 according to RotoWire. Personal opinion. Saquon Barkley is going off the board as RB16, about pick 32 overall, on ESPN, and RB14, about pick 30 overall, on Yahoo. This seems a little low to me, given Saquon is still relatively young and a bell cow who saw some improvements in his situation. Barkley strikes me as a similar style player as pre-knee arthritis Todd Gurley, in that they are among the most athletic and explosive players in the league, but have more average vision. This means that in the right offense and situation, they can be a game-breaking player. and perform like one of the best players in the league due to their athletic gifts and natural talent. But if they are dealt a subpar offensive line or coaching staff, like Todd Gurley in 2016 or Saquon Barkley the last couple of seasons, they play more like a below-average back because they tend to press a little too much, bouncing runs they shouldn't, and not trusting the blocking scheme, and try to do everything themselves, which doesn't work too well at the NFL level. I expect this to be a bounce-back season for Barkley, and he should be a good value considering he's going in the third round of most drafts. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. Saquon Barkley's My Cause, My Cleats in 2020 was for 22Q. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you have a player that you'd like to see covered in the video format of the Player a Day series, drop a comment below.